To unpack this conversation for us, we are now joined by Likho Bottoman, Director for Social Cohesion and Equity from the Department of Basic Education, and he joins us via our video link. Likho, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition. Perhaps paint a picture for us and just tell us how bad is vandalism of schools, specifically in the Eastern Cape.
Good evening, Bali, and thank you so much for inviting us to this show. The problem is quite bad, particularly in the Eastern Cape. And we see hikes of it, Mbali, especially around the times of protests, that, schools become the first points of distraction for communities when when community members are unhappy that they vandalize schools. But also we see that every time when we resource our schools with new technology and some of the innovations that we have seen in school infrastructure and some of the resources that are required in schools, that communities are not quite taking care of these new installations in schools, and that schools then become prone to vandalism in communities.
And I mean, this has a ripple effect. We heard some of the learners from that school in the Eastern Cape saying that they have to stay at home more. So learners are actually disadvantaged here and schooling and learning is affected.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest worry for us, because our greatest priority as the Department of Basic Education is to ensure that there is access to education, but also that there is sustained exposure to new installations and new innovations that are placed in schools. And so when they are vandalized or taken away from our schools, it's no longer just a criminal activity that we're dealing with, but we're dealing with an invasion of the human right for children, which is a right, an inalienable right to education, because it means that during that time when vandalism has taken place and there is no restoration of whatever has been taken away from the school, it means then that access to education for children has been taken away. It also then raises the question of the values of communities in which our schools are located.
And one would ask, why is there no sense of pride for the community to actually take care of these schools? Because, the schools are the future for our country.
We've also made an assessment as the Department of Basic Education to really try and figure out what exactly is the problem. Why is it that community members are finding it easy and comfortable for them to invade schools and impose the kind of vandalism that they're imposing? And we realize that it's probably because of the disconnect that happens between schools and communities. And that's why we are very happy now about the launch of this program, the National Inclusive Safer Schools Partnership, because what it does, it says that let us make the schooling a partnership between schools and communities. And we've tried to do this through existing community structures. But what we had not tried to do, Mbali, was to explore this through local municipalities and district municipalities. So within the intergovernmental relations and intergovernmental partnerships, it is for the first time that we're exploring this kind of partnerships for communities. And we're hoping to see great change and great effect.
And how will this program actually help communities and to make sure that these schools are protected through this program?
So it is on two levels. The first level is really about inculcating a culture of youth agency amongst young people themselves, so that they see themselves as part of the solution to the problems that affect them in their communities. And so we want to give them the responsibility to report criminal activity and to report vandalism and to report violence when they see it. But the second part of it is about empowering community assets or community structures, so that we leave community assets in those communities that will be able to partner with our schools, support our schools even when we're not there, so that government is not the only agency of implementation, but also agents of implementation would also come from communities themselves.
And how has this program been received by the community?
It was an overwhelming yes where we launched it with the Buffalo City Municipality today, Mbali. And we know that there are other districts also that exist in some of the participating provinces. There are 4 other districts in Eastern Cape also that are participating. And we know that it is a unanimous nod from communities, because it looks like this is what communities have been looking for, but they just didn't know what gateway to use and what doorway to use to be part of the solution. So we're very happy about it, and we're grateful to the German development agency, GIZ, for bringing us these resources so that we're able to touch our communities in the way that we have.
And would you say that the Eastern Cape is the only province, experiencing such challenges when it comes to schools vandalism, or are there other provinces experiencing the same problem?
I think there are pockets of this phenomenon in each of our provinces, and there are, of course, hotspots that have been identified by the provincial education departments. But what we find, Bali, is that the hotspots keep changing every time. We don't have a permanent hotspot of vandalism of our schools. It just depends on the season, and it also depends on the trend that has moved from district to district. And so our provincial education departments continue to monitor these trends and this phenomenon. There are, of course, those permanent hotspots that we are also taking care of in partnership with our provincial education departments. But each of the provinces does have a little bit of a problem of school vandalism.
And perhaps what is your message to communities who are experiencing the same problems?
We want to say to communities that we must get to a point where, as a country, we know that our our schools should be no-go zones of vandalism. Whether we are angry or we are protesting, or there's a point that we need to bring across to government, but we need to keep our hands off our schools, because at the end of the day, they affect the learning and the access to education and the right to education for our children. We also then want to say that communities should work hand in hand with schools. They must reach out to schools if they've got solutions that they think can help the schools deal with the issue of criminal activity and vandalism and violence in schools. They are free to do that. Schools, communities should see schools as the centers of life, not just the centers of learning in their communities.